Amidst the nobility and wealth of the Middle Ages, a woman was born who would mark the history of Christianity with her devotion, charity, and humility. This woman is Saint Hedwig, a saint known as the patroness of the poor and indebted. Her life is a testimony of how, even in the midst of power and influence, it is possible to live a deep faith, detached from earthly riches and focused on serving God and the needy. Hedwig was born in 1174 into a noble family in Bavaria, Germany. From an early age, she was prepared for a marriage that would unite kingdoms and strengthen political alliances, as was common at the time. At the age of 12, she married Henry I, Duke of Silesia and Poland. However, what could have been just another union between nobles turned into a great example of holiness and love for others. Even as a duchess, Hedwig never allowed herself to be seduced by the luxuries her position provided. On the contrary, from a very young age, she dedicated herself to prayer and works of mercy. Together with her husband, she supported the construction of churches, monasteries, and hospitals, demonstrating her deep concern for the spiritual and material well-being of her people. Saint Hedwig's devotion was intense, and her charity was impressive. Often, she would deprive herself of her own clothing and jewelry to help the poorest. Her heart burned with compassion for the needy, and for this reason, she became a great protector of those who found themselves in vulnerable situations. Her example of detachment and generosity still strongly echoes within the Church. One of the most remarkable aspects of her life was the vow of chastity she made, along with her husband, after the birth of their 7 children. Before continuing with this video, I would like to invite you to reflect with us on our spiritual life as Catholics. Many times, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we set prayer aside, even though we know how important it is for our spiritual life. With this in mind, I have created an ebook called Prayer Routine for Catholics. In it, I share simple and effective ways to integrate prayer into your daily life, bringing more serenity and closeness to God. This material is a valuable companion for those who wish to live their faith more intensely and consistently. The link to the ebook is in the first comment of this video. Click the link and receive your ebook right now. May God bless you. Although she lived a conjugal life, from that moment on, Hedwig and Henry lived as brother and sister, dedicating themselves entirely to God. It was an extraordinary decision for a noble couple, especially in an era when nobles were expected to have many heirs to secure family power. Hedwig's life was deeply marked by prayer and service to others. She frequently visited hospitals and leper colonies, personally caring for the sick and the poor. To Hedwig, her position as Duchess was not a privilege but a responsibility before God and humanity. Her gaze was always directed towards the marginalized, the excluded, and those often forgotten by society. Humility was a defining characteristic of Saint Hedwig. Although she was the wife of a duke and had great wealth at her disposal, she chose a simple life, dressing modestly and living as a true servant of Christ. On several occasions, she was seen barefoot, even during the coldest seasons, as a sign of penance and solidarity with the poor. Her family life, though surrounded by tragedies and difficulties, was always a testimony of faith. Hedwig lost several of her children while they were still young, something that caused deep pain in her heart. However, instead of revolting or turning away from God, she intensified her prayer life and turned even more to charity, finding comfort in serving others and fully trusting in divine providence. Among her great charitable works, the founding of the Cistercian convent of Trebnitz stands out, where her daughter Gertrude became abbess. This monastery became an important spiritual center in the region and a refuge for many women seeking a life consecrated to God. Hedwig maintained a close relationship with this convent, dedicating not only financial resources but also her time and prayers. Hedwig's holiness also manifested in her deep life of penance. She practiced rigorous fasting and other forms of mortification, always with the intent of drawing closer to Christ. The Duchess understood that to achieve holiness, it was necessary to follow the path of the cross, uniting herself to Christ's suffering for the salvation of souls. Hedwig's husband, Duke Henry, always supported her spiritual and charitable initiatives. Although he was a powerful ruler with military and political responsibilities, Henry deeply admired his wife's faith and often accompanied her in her works of mercy. Together, they formed an exemplary couple who ruled with justice and dedicated themselves to the spiritual and material well-being of the people. One of the greatest tragedies in Hedwig's life was the death of her eldest son, Henry II, in battle. Known as Henry the Pious, he was a devout ruler and a faithful follower of his mother's teachings. His premature death caused great sorrow to the saint, but once again, she showed unshakable faith, offering her suffering to God and redoubling her charitable efforts. Saint Hedwig had a great devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It was common to see her praying the Rosary and entrusting her concerns and sorrows to the Mother of God. This Marian devotion gave her strength during the most difficult moments, and Hedwig firmly believed that Our Lady interceded for her and her family. Her trust in Mary's intercession was a pillar of her spiritual life. Over the years, Hedwig became increasingly detached from political responsibilities and material wealth. After the death of her husband, she decided to live even more simply and withdrawn. She resided at the convent of Trebnitz, where her daughter was abbess, and lived as a simple Cistercian tertiary, dedicating herself to prayer and contemplation. Although she lived in the convent, Saint Hedwig never made formal vows as a religious. She continued to be a consecrated lay woman, maintaining her commitment to the outside world through charitable works. However, her life of prayer and penance deeply inspired the nuns and everyone around her. Hedwig was a model of Christian life, showing that holiness can be lived in any state of life. Saint Hedwig is often associated with the poor and indebted. This is because, during her life, she helped many people pay off their debts, freeing them from the slavery imposed by the financial constraints of the time. Her compassion for the indebted was so great that she became, over the centuries, the patroness of such individuals. Saint Hedwig's example of compassion and charity continues to inspire millions of faithful around the world. Her life was a clear reflection of Christ's teachings, which call us to love our neighbor and care for the most needy. Even living in a context of power and wealth, she chose the path of humility and service, renouncing earthly privileges to devote herself to the kingdom of God. Saint Hedwig's unshakable faith also manifested in her acceptance of suffering. She understood that the cross is an integral part of the Christian life, and for this reason, she never fled from moments of pain or trial. On the contrary, she embraced suffering with courage, uniting herself to the crucified Christ and offering her pains in reparation for the sins of humanity. Saint Hedwig passed away on October 15, 1243, at nearly 70 years old. Her death was preceded by years of intense spiritual and charitable life. Though her health was weakened, her spirit remained strong, always in communion with God. Her passage to eternity was peaceful, surrounded by prayers and accompanied by the nuns of the Trebnitz convent. After her death, Hedwig's fame for holiness spread quickly. Many miracles began to be attributed to her intercession, especially healings and the relief of financial difficulties. The people already venerated her as a saint before the Church officially canonized her, which occurred in 1267 by Pope Clement IV. One of the most famous miracles attributed to Saint Hedwig involved a young woman who had completely lost her sight. The young woman prayed fervently, asking for the saint's intercession, and soon, her vision was miraculously restored. This miracle further increased devotion to Hedwig, consolidating her as a powerful intercessor with God. Devotion to Saint Hedwig grew rapidly in Poland, Germany, and other Central European countries. She became a model of virtue for kings, queens, and ordinary people, showing that true greatness lies in serving God and others, not in power or material wealth. Her life inspired many other women of her time to follow a path of holiness. Throughout the centuries, Saint Hedwig has been represented in many works of art, always depicted for her simplicity and humility. In some representations, she holds a church in her hands, symbolizing her dedication to the construction of temples and the strengthening of faith. In others, she is seen with chains, reminding us of her compassion for prisoners and the indebted. Saint Hedwig's feast day is celebrated on October 16th, one day after the anniversary of her death. On this day, the faithful around the world remember her example of life and ask for her intercession, especially those facing financial difficulties or severe economic problems. She is undoubtedly a saint who continues to exert a powerful influence on the lives of Christians. Saint Hedwig's legacy goes beyond her works of charity and the founding of convents. She is an example that holiness can be lived in any state of life, whether in marriage, consecrated life, or in the lay world. Her life shows us that, regardless of our circumstances, we are all called to a life of union with God and service to others. In addition to her devotion to Our Lady, Saint Hedwig had a great veneration for the Eucharist. She attended daily Mass whenever possible and spent long hours in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. Before continuing with this video, I would like to invite you to reflect with us on our spiritual life as Catholics. Many times, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we set prayer aside, even though we know how important it is for our spiritual life. With this in mind, I have created an ebook called Prayer Routine for Catholics. In it, I share simple and effective ways to integrate prayer into your daily life, bringing more serenity and closeness to God. This material is a valuable companion for those who wish to live their faith more intensely and consistently. The link to the ebook is in the first comment of this video. Click the link and receive your ebook right now. May God bless you. The Eucharist was the source of her spiritual strength, and Hedwig firmly believed in the real presence of Christ in the consecrated host. For Saint Hedwig, faith was not something to be lived only in specific moments, but in every action of daily life. Her political and social decisions were deeply influenced by her belief in the dignity of every human being as the image and likeness of God. She saw Christ in every poor person and every sick person, and this motivated her to act with love and compassion. Her life is also a testimony of how marriage can be a path to holiness. Although her marriage to Henry began conventionally, they transformed their union into something deeply spiritual, making a vow of chastity and dedicating themselves to serving God and others together. Saint Hedwig teaches us that conjugal love can reflect the love of God. Saint Hedwig lived during a time of great political and social changes in Europe. She witnessed conflicts between kingdoms, economic crises, and territorial disputes, but she never allowed these circumstances to shake her trust in divine providence. For her, true stability came only from God, and therefore, she always entrusted all her concerns to Him. Even as a figure of great power and influence, Hedwig always remained faithful to the teachings of the Church. Her life is a clear example of how it is possible to be a just and pious ruler who places Christian values above any earthly ambition. In a time when many nobles sought only to increase their power, Saint Hedwig stood out for her justice and mercy. Saint Hedwig's humility was so profound that, even after her husband's death and her withdrawal from public life, she never sought recognition for her good deeds. For Hedwig, the only thing that mattered was pleasing God and following in the footsteps of Christ. Her life is a reminder that true greatness lies in service and humility. During the last years of her life, Saint Hedwig lived almost as a religious, although she never took formal vows. Her life at the Trebnitz convent was simple, dedicated to prayer and penance. She spent long hours in the silence of the chapel, meditating on the mysteries of faith and interceding for others. Even while living in the convent, Saint Hedwig continued to maintain contact with the outside world, especially to continue her works of charity. She frequently received visits from people seeking her advice or help, and Hedwig never refused an opportunity to do good. Her life of cloister was, in fact, a life open to love for others. Saint Hedwig's connection to the indebted stems from the fact that, during her life, she often paid the debts of those who could not repay them. At that time, those unable to pay their debts were often imprisoned or enslaved. Hedwig, moved by the harsh reality of the poor, intervened directly, freeing the captives and restoring the dignity of those living under the yoke of poverty. Saint Hedwig also interceded with local rulers to secure better conditions for the needy. Although she was part of the nobility, she did not hesitate to use her influence to promote justice and charity. Her fight was for the dignity of all, especially those who had no voice or resources to defend themselves. Hedwig's trust in divine providence was one of the keys to her holiness. Even in the face of many personal difficulties, such as the loss of her children and her husband's death, she never lost faith that God was in control of all things. This trust allowed her to completely dedicate herself to the service of others, knowing that, even in the most difficult situations, God never abandons those who trust in Him. Over the centuries, devotion to Saint Hedwig has spread to many countries, especially in Europe and Latin America. Churches, chapels, and altars have been dedicated to her, where the faithful light candles and offer prayers asking for her intercession. She is invoked not only in financial matters but also in health issues, family problems, and other life difficulties. The iconography of Saint Hedwig usually depicts her as a noblewoman dressed simply, holding a church in one hand and, in some versions, chains in the other. These images symbolize both her role in building churches and monasteries and her work in freeing indebted prisoners. Her representation often includes a serene face, reflecting her deep inner peace and trust in God. Although Hedwig had everything to live a comfortable and luxurious life, her conscious choice was the path of simplicity and service. Her renunciation of worldly pleasures is a lesson for Christians of all times, reminding us that true treasure is in heaven and that earthly happiness is fleeting. Hedwig knew that her wealth was to be used for the glory of God and for the good of others. Saint Hedwig's spirituality was deeply rooted in prayer. She dedicated long hours of her day to meditation and contemplation, always seeking to be in communion with God. Her prayer life was not isolated from her actions. On the contrary, prayer strengthened her desire to act with charity and justice. This balance between contemplative and active life is one of the distinguishing marks of her holiness. Throughout her life, Saint Hedwig was also a great promoter of peace. In an era marked by wars and conflicts, especially between neighboring kingdoms, she often intervened as a mediator, attempting to resolve disputes peacefully. Her influence as a duchess and her reputation for holiness gave her a moral authority that few dared to question. Her dedication to the common good went beyond the borders of her own kingdom. Hedwig had a broad vision of charity and believed that, as Christians, everyone had the responsibility to promote good in all circumstances. Her life reminds us of the importance of solidarity and of extending our hands to help, even those outside our immediate circle. The impact of Saint Hedwig's works was so great that, after her death, the Trebnitz convent, founded by her, became a pilgrimage center. Thousands of people came from all parts of Europe to visit her tomb and ask for her intercession. The fame of her miracles continued to grow, and stories of healings and graces obtained through her intercession multiplied. An impressive characteristic of Saint Hedwig's life is how much she understood the value of redemptive suffering. Unlike many of her time who saw suffering as something to be avoided at all costs, Hedwig accepted her pains and losses as opportunities to unite herself with Christ on the cross. She believed that by suffering with patience and faith, she was participating in the mystery of redemption. Saint Hedwig lived in a time when women had little voice in society. Yet her faith, virtues, and commitment to the gospel made her a figure of great influence. She used her position to promote good, and her life is a testimony that true leadership does not lie in power or strength, but in humility and service to others. Saint Hedwig's memory was preserved not only by the Church but also by the people, who always found in her life a model of hope. Her virtues are a reminder that, regardless of our social position or circumstances, we are all called to holiness. Her life was a constant pursuit of Christian perfection, and her story continues to inspire new followers of Christ. Saint Hedwig's example also serves as an antidote to the materialism of our time. In a world that often values the accumulation of wealth and material goods, she reminds us that true value lies in serving God and others. Her actions speak louder than any speech, showing that detachment and generosity are the paths to true happiness. The faithful who turn to Saint Hedwig in prayer often report a deep sense of peace and comfort. It is believed that her intercession is particularly powerful in times of crisis when everything seems lost. Saint Hedwig, who lived through many difficulties and faced many tragedies, understands human suffering and, for this reason, is a powerful ally before God. Another remarkable aspect of Hedwig's life was her commitment to education. She believed that knowledge and faith should go hand in hand, and for this reason, she encouraged intellectual and spiritual formation in her kingdom. She founded schools and promoted education among the young, especially among women, something unusual for her time. Her vision was of a future where faith was strengthened by a deep understanding of God's mysteries. For those who seek holiness in the midst of the world, Saint Hedwig's life is a beacon of hope. She shows us that, even occupying a position of power and responsibility, it is possible to maintain humility and live a life of charity. Her life is a reminder that holiness is not reserved only for monks or nuns, but is a universal vocation, accessible to all. Hedwig's love for the poor also made her a promoter of social justice in her time. She not only helped the needy financially but also fought for better living conditions for peasants and workers. Saint Hedwig believed that everyone, regardless of their social position, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Saint Hedwig was canonized shortly after her death, just 24 years later. Her holiness was evident to all who had known her life and witnessed her charitable works and profound faith. When Pope Clement IV canonized her, he recognized her life as a model for the entire Church, a life that reflected the light of Christ in a world often marked by darkness. The title of Patroness of the Indebted and Needy is one of the most beloved among Saint Hedwig's devotees. Through this title, the faithful find in her a friend and intercessor in moments of anguish, especially when facing financial difficulties. Her story inspires confidence that, with faith and perseverance, any crisis can be overcome. The lessons that Saint Hedwig leaves us are timeless. She shows us that true greatness does not lie in the accumulation of material goods or earthly power, but in the ability to love and serve others. Her life is a constant invitation to all Christians to turn to Christ, finding in Him the perfect model of charity and humility. Many of Saint Hedwig's devotees report that, when invoking her name in prayer, they experience a new strength to face life's difficulties. This strength comes from the example of Hedwig's life, who never gave up, even in the face of the greatest challenges. Her intercession is powerful because, as someone who lived a life of sacrifice and love, she deeply understands the struggles of every human being. In addition to her devotion to the poor, Saint Hedwig is also remembered for her dedication to the Church. She was always a faithful defender of Catholic doctrine and supported the local clergy, ensuring that churches were well cared for and that priests had the necessary resources to fulfill their pastoral duties. Her devotion to the Church was a reflection of her deep faith in Christ. For those facing financial challenges or difficulties of any kind, devotion to Saint Hedwig offers a source of hope. Her life is a testimony that, even in the worst situations, God never abandons us. Through Hedwig's intercession, many have found comfort and even miraculous solutions to their problems. Saint Hedwig continues to be a light in the life of the Church, an example of how charity and faith can transform the world around us. She lived according to Christ's words, serving others with joy and without expecting anything in return. Her life reminds us that we are all called to follow this same path of holiness, loving God above all things and our neighbor as ourselves. Saint Hedwig, pray for us.